So we had a baptism this morning, so thank you very much for allowing a little time to celebrate and enjoy everything that was going on with the baptism. Yes, yay. Today's class, I promised last week that we would step into some of the intellectual, the emotional discussions and kind of things, but I went back through my notes and I found that I had skipped over a particular sequence in the human biology and human development and some of those pieces. So I wanted to touch on that today. It's not a long, lengthy class, which is good because I'm starting late, but it's all right because we're going to have some good conversation. The point being, as we look at how we, humanity and the creation has been created, there's a lot of things that we can pull from that and say there's an indication that God did create us in a very particular fashion. And this, the idea of evolution and how evolution kind of created or ultimately got us to where we're at today, it's got a lot of holes, more holes than scientists are really willing to accept. But scientists are willing to say unequivocally that God cannot, not simply God doesn't exist, but God cannot exist because of all of the compelling evidence that says that creation had to occur along this evolutionary path. And there's absolutely a step-by-step sequence of evidences that prove that God did not create the universe the way God said he did. And today we're going to walk through some of those evidences and show that no, scientists are trying to get away with something. They're taking a lot of extraneous information and pieces of evidence and stringing them together in ways that just it doesn't make logical sense. So today I want to start with, see if I can get this one to work. All right, maybe we're not, there we go. I don't think I'm on yet. Yeah. All right. Am I on? We'll assume I'm on. So I want to walk through with these particular sequences. Yep, I don't think this one's on. It's all right. So I want to walk through with these sequences primarily, can animals have evolved to their current state? And we'll walk through that question and look at things like mutation versus evolution. Mutation, clearly understood. Evolution is one of those things that we have to kind of guess at. Organ development, how organs come about, specifically in humans, and some of the things that you recognize from Bible or lessons that you heard from the Bible, and how organs were created versus how organs evolved. And then some of the doubts that even Darwin has. Darwin is kind of the father of evolution, if you will think about it. And there's things that Darwin said, okay, you know, even I have to push the belief button on a few things, and so we can kind of walk through that a little bit. And at the end, we're going to get back to read the manual. The Bible is the manual of life, and it has a lot of good information in it, and we can take comfort in knowing the Bible was written by God, the same God who created us and made us the way we are. Okay, so we're going to start with, can animals evolve into their current state? So here is a warning in Scripture that says they exchanged God's truth for a lie and worshiped and served the creation rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. This is in Scripture, and it's the warning that says, hey, look, mankind is going to have this extreme temptation to want to rule out the Creator and instead put creation in His place and say that creation simply happened and there was no need for a Creator. God warned about this in the Bible long ago, and we're seeing it time and time again. And so I asked the question a while back, and we get the answer. The reason man wants to move the Creator out of the picture is the Creator asks us to do things for Him. The Creator rightfully asks for respect and worship. He is our Creator. We need to keep our Creator in the position of being who He is. God needs to be God. But man has a temptation to move God out of the way and put ourselves in the driver's seat because we want to have that supreme confidence, that ownership, that I am in charge and I am the master of my own destiny. Now, God gave us the desire to want to do good, but God also gave us the desire to do good for God. And we have to keep those two together. So evolution is this concept of survival of the fittest. And it follows a very logical sequence. There can't be any mystery behind evolution or evolution falls apart. So scientists will tell you that evolution has to be this logical survival of the fittest. Things get stronger, things get better, things constantly improve, and that's the natural way that selective evolution occurs. It selects things that are better than things that are not. Always has been the logic, always will be the logic. That's just the mantra that they produce. Here's the challenge, though. Major adjustments, significant changes to your organ structure is not a stable thing that happens. If I take a person and I make them a 5-legged individual, those 5 legs really have a hard time coping with a brain that's used to driving 2. Okay? So animals are, in their current state, very stable. Major organ shifts, taking something that used to breathe oxygen and having that suddenly grow gills and learn how to breathe in the water, that's a significant organ shift. Now, evolutionists will tell you, well, of course, over the millions and millions of years that animals have been on the earth, it's naturally logical to assume that that's how things occurred. Okay, I'm going to ask you the question, if you take 1 million monkeys on 1 million typewriters in 1 million years, will they produce Shakespeare? You've heard this in high school, right? Is it possible? Possible. Is it likely? No. It's completely random. It's like saying, you know, I'm going to have a tornado go through this junkyard and out of it is going to pop a 747. The odds of that happening are astronomically unlikely to happen. The likelihood is you're just going to get a whole bunch of gibberish. So as we go through this, the creature has to survive in this weakened state as it transitions from where it's at, a stable position, to this no man's land, into this other stable position. And it's strong in those stable positions, I will grant you that. But in the transition, it's this weak thing. And it defies the logic that survival of the fittest. It's not stronger in this gray zone. And in fact, when we look for evidence of these bridges between the species that says this species evolved into this species and evolved, the fossil records just simply don't show it. There's all these gaps between one species going to another species. And that's because the evolutionists will say, well, it was stable for 1 million years, and we had this brief period where magic happened, and then it became stable in its new state, and things happened again. Okay, well, if something's stable for 1 million years, doesn't change, changes, and it is stable for another 1 million years, how long did it take to change? How long was it in this transitionary period? Oh, just a few generations. Okay, time out. Now we're starting to play fast and loose with time. They're claiming you have millions of years for evolution to occur, but then they're saying that evolution really occurs in this brief period where there's no evidence that shows that it happened. There was a show a long time ago called The Wizard of Oz, The Man Behind the Green Curtain, pay no attention to him. We want to be able to pull thread on that and see that evolutionists are trying to make things happen behind the green curtain. Okay, genetic code, I mentioned this last week, genetic code doesn't allow for cross-species evolutions. In order for that to happen, I have to have something that can procreate with something that is not of the same genetic species as the species that it belongs to. A chicken is a chicken. It's not going to breed with a fox. It simply can't. The genetic material won't allow it. Genetic code allows for mutation. That is when an organism is of one species, but it develops attributes that can stay within that species and still populate within that species, but it's not jumping the species boundary. So what is this mutation versus evolution? Mutations are small changes in the genetic code to adapt to environments as they stand today. So this is where the host that is going through the mutations typically is stronger within just a few generations of what's going on. And mutations are reversible. I can start the mutation, and if suddenly the evidence or the environment doesn't allow it, the mutation goes back. Okay, so genetic code allows for and supports mutation. Got a comment here in the back. Let me get it.
Oh, yeah. A question, please, if you don't mind.
Yes.
Could you extend that other slide a little bit? Because when I go to the zoo, I see some things that they refer to as liger or seahorse. How does that relate to that?
Okay, so as we go into the zoo and we start looking at things that are in the zoo, I want to touch on this one real quick, and I want to get to your comment. Mutations occur, and in fact, the Bible warns us about mutations because in Leviticus 18, when you read through it, Leviticus 18 warns us about particular things. Specifically, children should not marry their siblings. Make sense? We know that today because of genetic mutations going rampant. That creates uncontrollable mutation as people start inbreeding. Mothers with the sons and, all of these things that God says is an abomination. Well, God said it was an abomination then because it creates rapid, uncontrolled mutations that ultimately destroy the organism. And we see that in the animal world, and we see it in ourselves as well. Cheetahs have inbred for so long that unfortunately the genetic code for cheetahs has decomposed to the point that realistically it's not a very viable code anymore. And so we look at evolution as these jumps between species, and we look at mutations as these small paths, and we understand that mutations, if they're uncontrolled and could ultimately lead to evolution, create these disastrous consequences upon the host organism. It doesn't make them any stronger. It makes them weaker. Okay, so we were asking about the zoo. Here's an example of a finch. 4 different types of finches. They could all breed in among themselves. They're all the same genetic code with some simple variations. The beaks. Why did the beaks change the way they are? Well, about 1,000 years ago, these finches found themselves in areas where food was changing around on them. Some of them eat seeds, some of them eat worms, some of them have to go hunt insects that are in trees, aka the little sharp bill that looks like a woodpecker, but they're all finches. They just have adapted, mutated, to meet the conditions that they're in, to catch the food that they're after. So this gets back to the zoo question. When we're looking at the zoo and we're going through and we're looking at all of the different types of snakes or the different types of spiders, there is a point where as you mutate through, that mutation can create a particular lineage that no longer that particular gene set will match this other gene set. Okay? It's not evolution, it simply is advanced mutation that has prevented those particular things from being able to stay together. It takes a long time, but not millions of years. In fact, there are some mutations that can occur to the point where they cannot be reversed, and those are about, I think it was said, 200 generations, mutations can ultimately make enough changes in the mitochondrial DNA that prevent those from being able to come together. They're rare, but it does happen, and that's back to the zoo question when we have some snakes that can't mate with other kinds of snakes. They're still snakes, but the genetic code has mutated enough that they don't line up as well. And the reason is, if they could, they would create such a weak offspring that it wouldn't survive. Let me get a microphone for you, Kwesi, just a second.
I'm a little bit confused about mutations and reproduction. Mm-hmm. Because mutation is a process of dividing dividing itself into different species and becomes the same as the parent.
Yes.
And reproduction is where we have there should be some kind of reproduction in terms of the same genetic code.
Right.
Because an animal cannot reproduce with a human being.
Right.
And another animal with a different genetic code cannot reproduce with another, like a lion and a goat. It's not possible.
Right.
But mutation occurs when there is a continuous division of the same parent and it becomes the same kind of species that represents the same, and is different from reproduction. And so if you talk about God, like asking the Israelites not to marry their family members because it will bring about mutation.
Right.
It's a little bit different from where it's the same reproduction, but it's not mutation, because at the end of the day, it is the law of the Lord.
Yes.
The only thing is, if I have a disease as a family member, the same disease will continue forever because it's the same family that I'm marrying from. Like,
Yes.
when it comes to somebody with a gene, like this disease, with a disease, let's make it a disease,
Right.
and
Like
the
sickle
same
cell
person
anemia.
marries another person
Yes.
with the same disease, then it's going to be in the family forever.
Right.
But it's not a form of mutation.
It's not, and that's where I want to get back to the key, and you hit on a couple of key points. Mutation is, there are two ways that mutation happens. Either it happens at birth, where the parents get together and the more dominant of that gene connection comes in. For example, somebody has sickle cell anemia in their genetic code, somebody doesn't. Sickle cell anemia is actually the weaker, so it can be replaced by somebody who doesn't. But if two people who have sickle cell anemia come together, then there's a good chance that it'll be continued on. That's the mutation that ultimately creates the weakened character, the weakened offspring, and we want to make sure we don't create environments for that. And that's why God said inbreeding with families creates the potential where those weaker genes can become dominant and create these patterns that ultimately make for an individual's weak. There's another mutation that happens within the lifespan of the individual. For example, these birds, over time, the bill found itself being more functional as the gene that makes the bill had to make it stronger. So like your fingernails, for example. As your fingernails become stronger, that gene starts becoming more dominant in the individual over their lifetime, and when they procreate, they pass that on. So there's an internal mutation and mutation that happens within the breeding. The mutation that happens within the breeding is the dangerous one. Okay, so getting into science a little bit more than I wanted to, but I want to go back to this concept of organs and lungs, organ development, because the hearts and lungs and the blood and liver are the two things that we can pull out of the Bible. So then the Lord God formed a man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and he became a living being. There's something magical that happens at your first breath. God's breath kickstarted Adam. But we also have this concept, for you are created in my inmost being, you knit me together in my mother's womb. God is saying, I designed you in the womb, and I designed you to breathe. Sounds like there's two different parts of this. There is. Before birth, your heart operates like a two-cylinder engine. Only two heart valves, only two cylinders are working. The bottom two valves are working, but they're not pumping blood. There's a reason for that. Can you breathe in your mother's womb? Nope. Where do you get oxygen from when you're in your mother's womb? Your mother, the umbilical cord. The heart can't pump blood to the lungs when you're in the womb because the lungs are still developing and there's no oxygen in the lungs for them to get. So the heart has to work in this two-cylinder mode until the lungs start to function. The problem is, how long is it between the time you're born and the time you need to breathe on your own? Seconds, maybe a minute or two, realistically. If you're not breathing on your own within minutes of birth, you won't survive, because you no longer are pulling oxygen from your mother, the umbilical cord is gone. The instant you take your first breath, there is a miracle that occurs inside your heart, and I'll call it a miracle. The heart has two valves that, because the lungs are closed, those valves are opened, and it allows the heart to pump blood in a very particular way so that blood comes from the umbilical cord, goes through the embryo, and then back down. The instant you take your first breath, when your lungs inflate for the very first time, it moves the heart ever so slightly and closes those two valves off. Opens up the bottom two valves, and suddenly blood starts flowing in the direction it's supposed to, which is through the lungs. This happens in seconds. And that's why doctors used to really be careful and listen and attentive to the baby's first cry. If the baby didn't cry within a few seconds of birth, the doctor knew the child was in danger. Now, I'll ask you, if this has to happen within seconds, the likelihood of dying, if it doesn't happen the very first time, is significantly high. Do you have 1,000,000 years to let this evolve into the stuff that it is today? Can this just naturally occur over 1,000,000 years? No, it doesn't make any sense. This has to be right the first time. It can't guess. It can't play around and keep trying to, because it's going to fail every time that it's not right. And the sequence of events have to be based upon how it is in the womb, knowing it's going to birth and is going to breathe air, and all of this has to come together precisely at the same time. Okay. God knew this. He designed us in our womb, and he breathed life into Adam. Those two things pretty much make this a design by a creator. This simply can't evolve this way. Here's another view of it. You can see that the way this flows through, the umbilical cord is the key piece to begin with, but God designed it so that upon your first breath, the umbilical cord is disconnected, is no longer part of it, and then it grows into being simply a redundant part of the body. Critical for birth, useless after. God's already got that designed. Let's talk about the blood. The Bible says that Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Why did God say, Isaac, on the 8th day, circumcise your son? Why not wait a little while? I mean, we got time on that. I've got a comment here. Let me get a mic for you.
I heard that if you circumcise a baby before the 8th day,
Yes.
bleed to death.
Yes.
I don't know if there's an enzyme or something that develops in the body that causes you to clot at the 8th day or later.
For the first week, a baby does not have any clotting agents. In fact, up until the 7th day, clotting agents really aren't in the baby's body, and doctors have to be very careful of that. Because if the baby gets sick, gets cut, the baby is likely to bleed to death. Because the clotting agent, let me pull this up real quick. I actually have notes on this, I promise. I didn't put it on my slide, I wished I had, but the exact enzyme is vitamin K, and it's combined with, hang on, okay, so there's certain types of proteins and platelets, fibrin. Fibrin is that combination of vitamin K and proteins that form in the bloodstream that allow you to clot. Fibrin is not there until long about the 7th day. Now, an interesting thing happens. For about 24 hours, from the 7th day to the 9th day, the liver finally kicks in. It wakes up and says, hey, you need you need these things in your bloodstream. And in fact, on the 8th day, your body has 110% of that clotting factor, more than you have in your entire life. On the 8th day, that is when your body has a surplus of these clotting agents. Scientists know this back in 1500 BC. Not a clue. Had no idea that clotting agents in blood was important to this. God knew. And therefore, when God says circumcision is going to happen, God's careful to say, look, there's a particular day you do this on. Don't do it any other day. We didn't know that at the time. Had no idea that this is why God said on the 8th day do this, because God designed us so that on the 8th day we would have this particular excess of blood clotting. Now, I ask you this. Did God change us so that we have the 8th day so that we could go through circumcision for those of us that are guys? Or did God design us from the very beginning to have this, knowing that this would be one of the things we ultimately would have to deal with? Circumcision would become part of us and part of the Hebrew life and culture, and therefore he designed us from the beginning to have it. Show of hands, did God design us from the beginning this way, or did he mutate us so that we had it on the 8th day? designed us that way. God knew before Adam hit the planet, this would be a requirement. And so from Adam on, we've had this particular feature. That's pretty cool. Again, I look back at this and I say, God knew ahead of time when he was designing Adam what Adam needed long before sin introduced the world, long before we came to the point where circumcision would be required. We had this going on. And so these are the things that God designed ahead of time for us to have today. And he says so in the Bible that we can say this is why God did these things. Darwin's doubts. I want to wrap up with this concept. So Darwin is kind of seeing all of this. He doesn't know enough about the science behind it, but he's guessing and he's struggling mightily, trying to make sure that evolution wins in this debate. But Darwin is looking at this concept of the hearing of the ear and the seeing of the eye. And the Lord has made them both. The Lord has made them both. He didn't evolve them. He didn't allow them to occur. God made both our hearing and our eyes. I want to poke at the eyes for a bit, literally. The eye is such a complex organism that and I'll let you guess at which animal is which by looking at the eyes. If you notice, there's some slits that go up and down and some slits that go left and right. And they have a function. There's a reason why. The slits that go left and right are designed to look for and scan the horizon for threats. The ones that go up and down are the ones that look for and judge distance to target. Okay, so predators have eye slits that go up and down. Cats, dogs, things that jump. Animals that are prey, sheep, horses, cow, have slits that go left and right. They did a study on horses and they were like, how does the horse that spends most of its head down, and sheep spend most of their head down grazing, why does this horizontal slit help them out? Because when their heads are upright, the slit is this way, and when they bend down, obviously the slit is going to be in a different direction. Guess what? The eye rotates in its socket. The slit stays horizontal the whole time it's down feeding. They had no clue this was a function of the eyeball in them until they studied sheep, cows, and horses grazing. And they watched them carefully with very intense magnification, and they watched, and the eye literally rotates so that that slit stays perfectly parallel to the ground the whole time. That's amazing. That doesn't just evolve. Think about how many times the animal would have died trying to get the eyeball to do that right. Well, if it didn't do it right the first and every time, the animal's going to end up on the plate of some hungry predator. The eye had to know that was what it was going to do when its head is upright and how to rotate down, because now I'm combining functions. I'm combining the function of understanding my own eating. I'm combining my function of survival. I'm moving all this stuff together, and it defies logic that all this could come together this way. So, again, evolution says form follows function. So the eye needs to change to adapt the role that the eye plays. That's the thought. Okay, I'm going to ask you this question. If an eagle needs the eyesight to be an eagle, can it be an eagle before its eyes are developed enough to recognize targets on the ground, fly down, and eat them? It'll starve to death. Okay, well, let's back up that evolutionary model. And let's say that the eye just happens to evolve to this really, really intense, awesome eyeball that the eagle has before the eagle needs it. What's the eagle going to eat while this really powerful eyeball is being developed? Well, it's not good for eating grain, because the beaks and the claw and everything else are designed for tearing animals apart. So I now have this dilemma that evolutionists face. If I'm going to evolve an eagle, it's got to have claws, and it's got to have beak, and it's got to fly, and it's got to be swooping over, but it's got to have this eyeball that can handle all of this tremendous rate of movement, speed, precision. But it's got to survive millions of years while this eyeball is coming together. it's going to starve for 1,000,000 years. It's going to try, and it'll try all these monkeys on keyboards, banging away, until finally, one eagle manages to get it all together. That one piece of Shakespeare comes off of the typewriter. Okay, I got one piece of Shakespeare. How many eagles does it take to procreate? 2. And they got to procreate in a male-female fashion. If I don't get a male and a female to evolve the same way, same time, same genetic code, same form, same function, everything else, the eagle will never happen. It will never come to be. And not just the eagle, the horse, the donkey, the zebra, the lion, all of these animals that we're talking about, they had to come together in exactly the right shape, the right pair, right pattern, right time, right place, or this whole thing is moot. God told us in Genesis, He created Adam and Eve. He created the zebra. He created the ox. He created the camel. He created all these animals to be who they are, to be what they are. Darwin even says this: when he looks at the eye, to suppose that the eye, with all its contrivances and adjustments to focus and distance and correction and everything else, that the eye could have been formed by natural selection, he freely confesses, is absurd in the highest sense. And this is the guy who is looked at by scientists as the founder of the entire evolutionary cause. Now, this is back in 1859. If Darwin knew today all of the genetic makeup and everything that was going on, and he had the scientific evidences that he could get his hands on today, if he had that back in 1859, I'm thinking Darwin probably would have said, hey, natural selection may occur, but it probably didn't. And in fact, when you look at Darwin's books and Darwin's speeches, he hypothesizes that evolution could happen. He doesn't say evolution did. He hypothesized that evolution is a plausible explanation for how we got to where we're at. Scientists since Darwin have taken what Darwin said and said, okay, not only did Darwin say this, he said that emphatically, because this evolution happened the way it did, it precludes any other possible way of us getting to where we're at. Darwin's theory of evolution, that's based on hypothesis and subjection, is so correct and so fixed and so guaranteed that it eliminates the possibility that God could have done what he did. That's the tragedy that I see today. That's what I want us to be able to go back and say, look, let's hold a little bit. Let's pump the brakes on this evolutionary theory thing. Because there's not enough meat behind the evolutionary theory for us to ever say God could not and did not do it this way. I think scientists, if given the opportunity, would willingly say, hey, you know, this evolutionary theory, it needs work. Let's think about God in concert with evolution. I think if scientists were given an individual opportunity, they would say that. Unfortunately, scientists fall victim to the very first part that we were talking about earlier. Get back to my verse here in a moment. They exchanged God's truth for a lie and worshiped and served the creation rather than the Creator. Scientists are falling victim to the exact thing God warned us about so many years ago. Man has a tendency to want to be in the driver's seat. Scientists want their theories to be true so badly that they're willing to overlook a lot of holes and gaps and say, well, in the absence of anything else, this has to be the truth. Come in here. Let me get a mic for you.
There's also a reward system in place for the folks who want to continue to push the evolutionary narrative, right?
Yes.
Because they've tried to make this, this theory a consensus. Now, if you try to say anything against that, then you're not going to get the resourcing and things like that you need. So they've incentivized the lie as well, financially and in terms of, own popularity and fame.
Right.
And that's what we're kind of pushing against, and that's what makes it difficult when you have folks who will be more inclined to trust the notion of randomness as opposed to the thing that won't get them paid.
Right. The problem is the reinforcement that the scientific community places on evolution has become dogmatic to the point that, like you said, you're not going to get listened to if you speak out against the evolutionary mantra or the model. I've got a comment over here. Let me get a microphone for you.
If I may.
Yes.
But that is science. Science is testing of theories, testing of observations, testing of what has been obtained.
Mm-hmm.
I am a scientist, but I'm also a child of God, and I know my Creator.
Yes.
So regardless of what scientists have shared with the world regarding Darwinism, evolution, there are those scientists like me who very much aware who created the world.
And I applaud scientists who are in that boat. I would ask you this: would you feel comfortable going to a scientific convention and challenging evolution on the premise of nothing more than what you believe is Christianity?
Would I be comfortable with that?
Would you be comfortable with that? Good. You're few. I have talked to scientists. I'm an engineer, so I spend a lot of time amongst the STEM community. I talk to scientists individually. Scientists have the courage to stand up. Collectively, when I get scientists together in a room and I ask them, hey, how much credence do you give creation versus evolution? There's this awkward silence. Collectively, the scientific community, unfortunately, doesn't have the courage that you do individually. And that's the problem that I think we need to address. In public schools, our kids are not rewarded for the courage of saying, hey, evolution is still a theory. Scientists are working on it. They haven't got it down to a science yet. It is the theory behind evolution, not a truth. Let's put it back in the theory bowl. If our kids say that in public schools, our kids are ridiculed. They are looked at as the wacky few. And unfortunately, that puts a huge pressure on the courage and the conviction of our kids to stand up and say, look, God is who God is. God is our creator. God created this place, and we can have faith in the Bible because we know God did the things that he said. And it's that courage that I want to bring back into the Christian faith by saying, look, we have principles that we can ask scientific questions. And again, I say that because at the beginning of the conversation, I'll say, of the scientific community, who believes in evolution? Almost everybody. After a few conversations like this, I'll say, okay, now how much faith are you going to put in evolution? The hands start to go down a little bit. I got to come into the back. Jerry?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, if anybody is wondering what that book, chapter, and verse is, for what's on the screen right now, it's Romans 1, verse 25.
Thank you very much. I forgot to put I've got a couple of chapters in here that I forgot to put the references on. Thank you. So, comment real quick here.
Sorry.
No, you're fine.
I like that they call evolution a theory, because a theory is something that has been proven in a lab. And to talk about the evolution of man, you cannot prove that. It is a hypothesis.
Yes, the theory.
Why are you calling evolution a hypothesis?
I will agree with that. But I'll be happy even if they back off to theory, because theory simply means I haven't proven, I've got a concept. Hypothesis is probably where evolution is at today, legitimately.
I thought a theory was you take a hypothesis, you do scientific experiments, you prove it, your hypothesis is true, and then you can call it a theory as the scientific.
There's a couple of pieces along there. You're right. Theory is not on the fact statement. Fact is if I can empirically prove that this happens every time. Even gravity is a theory.
Sorry?
Even gravity is a theory. So gravity has proven to work, but they can't mathematically state why.
We have
Right. In order for it to become a fact, I have to explain why it happens. I can't explain why evolution exists. Scientists can't explain.
Like when we say evolution of man,
Yes.
you can't, nobody has observed that what they want to say, that people want to say started with a
Yeah.
amoeba or Big Bang. Nobody was there to observe it and do a scientific experiment to
Right.
prove it, so it cannot be a theory.
It-
So men have taken things that aren't even scientifically based on our definitions, and they have worked them to to elevate evolution to a higher level than it really is.
Yeah, and that is the challenge. Evolution has moved up to a point where it's almost fact or interpreted as fact, and we want to back it off down to say, this is hypothesis. All right, thank you very much. We are out of time. I appreciate it very much. Next week, we're going to get into, again, the psyche and the emotional logics of things. Good class for this one. I appreciate your time and patience, and let me go a little over. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Ricky Cook, minister here at the Laurel Church of Christ. We hope you've enjoyed our video broadcast, and we'd love to have you with us in person as a special guest. Currently, we offer Bible classes for all ages on Sundays at 9:30 a.m., followed by our Sunday worship service at 10:30 a.m. Wednesday evenings, we have Bible class at 7 p.m. Please come and visit with our church family. We believe that you'll want to come back again. Have a question? Please reach out to our elders at elders@laurelchurch.net. We look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks, and God bless.